For that introduction. I always tell my buzzing ladies, I have tea with them often in the mornings. Remember, if you've got hives in urban areas, each of the municipality have got rules as to the, there's a list of things you need to adhere to in order to keep bees in urban spaces. But yes, I sit with my bees and I say to them, really girls, I did not sign up for public speaking. All I wanted to do was to showcase your incredible slow food. It really is sacred. Yes, but anyway, here I found myself, and I'm doing what I love, and it's an incredible privilege to be able to speak to audiences. I love hearing everybody's bee and honey stories, and let me tell you, there is stories out there, especially with our honeybees. South Africa and Africa, we have got bees that are feisty. They are innately defensive. We don't like to call them aggressive. Compared to the European bees, they are generally a lot more docile. So when you see these videos on YouTube and that with just a veil and you're working your bees, please do not try that with our honeybees. We've got highly experienced beekeepers that still, land in trouble. Anyway, so very warm welcome. I've got lots to share with you. I can't believe it's nearly a year ago. Every single one of my presentations are different. Honey is seasonal, and we are finding ourselves now in beautiful spring. It is absolutely my favorite month, even before this whole honey and bee journey. I just love how new life pops up around us, and if you sit and you zone into your little microorganism, whether that's in your garden or your urban spaces, there is so much going on around us. It really is like having, you're on a safari thing. It's just in a miniature world. You see, really, if you sit down and observe, especially with these bee hotels, I know that Tutus Loco have often come and chatted to you. I work very narrowly with Kim and her mom. I absolutely love the work that they've done. And the late Peter Webb did phenomenal bee awareness just to try and expand that general knowledge. Can you still hear me? I'm trying to find a balance between the two. Right, so there is 22,000 bee species in the world, and I know your garden club, I must just tell you, is far more educated than the average person worldwide because of the work that Tutus Loco and the talks they've done and their beautiful little bee hotels. Of that 22,000 bee species, in South Africa we are blessed with around about 1,300. Now if you compare that to the UK, they only have around about...
That mic is very soft, some people can't hear you.
Okay, there we go, is that better? Yes?
I don't.
Can everybody hear? Can you put your hand up if you can't hear me? There we go. Right, so in the UK there's around about 270 bee species. So you can just see what an incredible diversity we have. And some of those, now with the Namakwalanse blomme, Knarsvlakte, there are some of these solitary bees that are uniquely developed. They have evolved physiologically to be very specific pollinators to a specific plant, and if they die, then that whole little ecosystem will go. So it really is true that not just our bees, but all our pollinators are in serious trouble. One of the key questions that I often get is people come to me and say, I want to start beekeeping, how can I start? Then my very first question I will ask you is why? Why do you want to start beekeeping? Because if it is to save the bees, then I would recommend that is arguably one of the worst things you can do in the absence of understanding your botanical footprint. So if you are doing it for honey, then that is a different journey. But first and foremost, the first thing to understand is that we need to have enough food for the bees. So you can imagine if you've got cows in a certain space, you can only put so many cows in a foraging area. You can't go and put 1,000 cows in a small space. And there's been such a hype and it's so popular for people now to have their own bees that often we just put hives in areas without really knowing what's flowering for the bees and pollinators every single season. So I always say to people, if you are starting beekeeping, in order to save the bees, then please rather consider planting for bees, unless this is a hobby that you really want to get into. So my second recommendation is then find a mentor, an experienced beekeeper who you can learn from. There is a fantastic beekeeping of South Africa. We used to call it the Blue Book. It's just been updated. Read that. Go for a beekeeping course. If you're doing it for honey, then again, start with planting. Understand your botanical footprint. Find a mentor that you can learn how to extract the honey. But from an overall point of view, if you are doing it to save the bees, then please rather consider planting for bees. Okay, that's my key message. So this is a photo of the comb that we, 6 years ago, the bees moved in, as they do, into our irrigation box. And our wonderful gardener, George, he's just an unbelievable human being, and he calls me Mum. And his mum, the beans, he calls the bees beans, is Malawian. The beans have moved in, so it took me a bit of understanding where these coffee beans have moved into. Anyway, so off we went. And you won't believe how quickly these bees can draw out comb. It is unbelievable. So we got hold of beekeeper Andrew, and that evening he came to relocate the bees. And I said to him, if there is comb, can you just break off a few pieces, because I wanted to show the children. And at that point I realized that I myself had actually never seen or held a piece of comb, honeycomb, you know. In fact, I didn't even know it was that white. I had no idea. That's virgin comb. That is brand new comb. And so he did, and that evening I held it up to the kitchen light, this little piece you see here. And I was just absolutely blown away. And I'm quite curious. So I wanted to know, how do they do that? It is perfection. And then the second thing that struck me, it is such a light structure. Like, it's really light. How does this light structure successfully hold one of the heaviest liquids known to us? That was just two of the questions. And there was a lot of it. Like, what? Anyway, so I started reading, and 6 years later, I can still not tell you how they do that. There are various theories on it, but what is interesting is they excrete, the worker bees. She only excretes wax droplets for a certain period of her lifetime. So underneath the abdomen, there are 4 sets of 2 little glands, so 8 glands, and she will excrete tiny little droplets of wax, which is in liquid form, and as soon as it makes contact with the atmosphere, it sets into wax scales, and they will use their legs and, you know, loosen it from under, or like skept it out, basically. Take it, and then they will build this, they construct this comb. And one of the things they do, they actually hold hands. We call it festooning. So sometimes you see that the bees are literally holding hands. The end of their legs, they've got these claw-like, where they also use the claws to sort of hang from flowers upside down and forage and collect nectar and pollen. But they are incredible, and consider it is dark inside this hive. Okay, there's no one with a ruler that's going, okay, girls, because it's only the girls that pulls it. So the buzzing ladies does all the hive duties. They do the foraging, they collect the nectar, they build the comb, they feed the young, they are security bees, they remove the debris, they collect the propolis. Every single task inside the superorganism is performed by female bees. But yes, so that was the start of my journey. And one of the theories is that they actually build round shapes, and the tension of the palatable wax pulls it into hexagon. There's all kinds of theories, but what we do know is it is the strongest structure that is known to humans, is the hexagon cell. And in fact, they've used the hexagon structure for the inside of wings. It's the lightest, strongest structure known to us of aeroplanes. The wings inside have got a hexagon structure. Oh, the other thing I want to tell you, do you see how, so what the bees do, if you've got a wax sheet, can I just see who's beekeepers amongst us today? Have we got any hobbyist beekeepers? Anybody that wants to start beekeeping? But now I've put you off. But one very interesting thing is they build a wax foundation in the middle, and then they will pull out the hexagon cells from either side of this foundation sheet. So if you have a look at that, you see that it's not a complete mirror image where they pull the wax, that it's slightly ajar. And by doing that ajar, you can see the structure at the back. It's slightly ajar. That strength, just by doing that, they strengthen that structure between 18 and 20%. Right? So there's different papers that claims different percentages. So don't hold me to that. But the essence is that significantly increases the strength of the hexagon structure. So this is our little worker bee. She's a young bee. And how do we know this? Because on her thorax, she's still covered in hair. And as the bees age, they live between 4 and 6 weeks. In the summertime, when it's really hot and there's a strong nectar flow, sometimes they can live only 5 weeks, it depends. So between 5 and 7 weeks. The queen bee can live between 5 and 7 years, 4 years, it depends. In commercial operations, often when the egg-laying pattern of the queen bee goes down, commercial pollination industry, they would squash the queen bee to trigger the pheromones of the worker bees or the rest of the superorganism to raise a new bee because their egg-laying patterns are going down. So there's all kinds of creative things that's happening right now. It is true that we need to save the honeybees, protect the honeybees. Okay, we need to look after them. It is an absolute myth that the honeybees are dying out. Myth, okay, that's not true. In fact, if you look at the statistics, it goes up, the number of honeybees throughout the world. Do we have enough honeybees to pollinate the ever-increasing plantations? Especially in South Africa, we see explosion of the blueberries, macadamias, it goes on and on. No, we don't have enough honeybees to pollinate our extensive increased plantations. We don't have enough honeybees, so that is true. Do thousands or hundreds of thousands of honeybees die? Sometimes we've seen in America with the almonds, pollinating the almonds. Yes, they do. Because imagine if so what happens with our pollination, there's two very distinct arms in honey production. Okay, it's really important to understand this. The majority of our beekeeping industry, our beekeeping industry, we've got very large pollinator farmers, bee farmers, and they will drive in, their truckloads. So let's say it's the canola and the Western Cape flowering, or the apple blossom, avocado, sunflower, just to name a few. They will bring the bees into those plantations, and the bees work. They pollinate those flowers or crops for us, and then after that they get loaded up, so you will have a contract with a farmer to pollinate. And then you will load up your bees, and then we'll go off to the next crop. But the window periods in between those flowering periods between the different crops is crucial for the pollinators to expose their bees to healthy foraging. So in the Western Cape, that healthy foraging is the eucalyptus trees. And as we know, they're not indigenous, they're exotic. And as we know, the Western Cape nearly ran out of water a couple of years ago, I think 5 years ago now. So the government responded by chopping down all these trees. Now, there's around about 900 eucalyptus trees in Australia. In South Africa, we've got around about 200 species. But Martin Johannes Meyer have written a book, Bee Plants of South Africa. If you're interested, it really is a book worth getting. This is his life work. And he has studied and tested all these different plants in South Africa that can feed bees. And he's given them a value. So pollen value is pollen P or 0, then it's got no food, no nutritional value. And up to number 3 is fantastic nutrition. Same with nectar. So you get nectar 0, 1, 2, 3 or P 1, 2, 3. The eucalyptus trees sits at P and N3. It is the best food for our honeybees in order to strengthen those swarms so they can go off and do the next crop. So in the absence of that, what must the beekeepers do to keep their swarms alive? Because you must remember, they've now got a contract. They've got a contract to deliver 2,000 swarms during the apple orchard blooming. They have to feed them sugar water. So when we hear it as public, we go, oh my gosh, that is terrible. And it is. But the reality is, what is the alternative? So you can understand that the honey is coming from your large-scale commercial production. Often, not all of them, a lot of farms are doing fantastic work with regenerative farming practices, with crop protection sort of plans they're trying to move away from chemicals. So please don't say, that bee lady says we can't touch avocado honey, but the reality is that the honey's coming from generally, from your citrus, from your avocados, macadamia. Those crops are often exposed to a lot of crop protection chemicals. So innately the honey is not the same quality as if you've got honey from a hive that is sitting in the northwest province in the bush, in die bytjies so ver as wat hulle vlieg. They've got an access to a choice of food that is variety, as well as largely a lot less exposed to contaminants than large-scale crops. Okay, so often the honeys from these beekeepers or pollination services, there can be very strong nectar flow. Citrus is one; those boxes fill up really quickly. Macadamia is another. So often the honey would be a secondary advantage to the pollination. Their first and foremost work is they are giving contracts to pollinate it. And those honeys are large-scale honeys, and they often land up in your large-scale production plants. And and that is where the volume of our honey comes from. So all I want you to be conscious of is when you are looking for honey for health, the best honey that you can find is the honey that is from small-scale artisanal beekeepers, if you can buy directly from them. That's your first prize. Another question I often get is, but how do I know if honey is real? It is now becoming the third most adulterated food item. Some research says the fifth, whatever. It is right up there. Highly adulterated. Honey is incredibly complex. I mean, at Apimondia now, at the end of September, they used to have international honey awards. They've done away with that, because it is actually impossible to test across all those 18 different things. Because at Apimondia, if you want to enter a honey, they used to bring the testing, the different testing machines, etc. is at Apimondia. They test those honeys and then it get entered into competition. But now we pick up antibiotics, we pick up all kinds of pesticides that they use in such a wide range. So the test that they need to do is so much more than just your ash content, NMR, sugar analysis, all these different things, pollen. So they've just done away with that altogether. This is the first Apimondia they've done away with the international honey competition. To give you an example, the honeybee have got a separate honey tummy. How cool is that? And so when she goes out to forage from her botanical footprint, she's got a long proboscis that works a bit like a straw. She will suck up the nectar into her separate honey tummy, and at that point the nectar is around about 80% high in moisture. And when we harvest the honey, they will cap the honey. The honey is deemed ripened by the bees. When you uncap it, that honey sits normally between around about 18%. Now, in some botanical footprints, like George, or where it is very humid, you will find the moisture climbs up because honey is hygroscopic and it just sucks out the moisture from the air. We see Northern Africa, or even Brazil, you've got some of those forest or tropical forest honeys where innately your moisture level will naturally sit a little bit higher. But in general, let's say 18%. So she has to work really, really hard to reduce that nectar water percentage from 80% right down to 18%. And there's a few things that they do. But honey is only deemed honey once it's been ripened by the bees. And when they suck the nectar into their separate honey tummy, they've got enzymes that they add from both their tummy and from saliva. A lot of enzymes. So that's the amino acids, it is protein, and a lot of chemical changes, or the chemical changes are already happening with that as soon as the saliva or those enzymes are added to the nectar. Then when she reaches the hive, then she will regurgitate these little droplets of nectar to a sister bee. We call it tryphaloxis. So during this process of tryphaloxis, where you pass on some insects to it as well, that they are passing it on to a sister bee, and the sister bee again will add some enzymes from her saliva and her tummy. Now the amount of times that they pass these droplets to one another all depends on how strong the nectar flow is. So they're flexible, they constantly adjust themselves to the environmental conditions. So if there's lots of nectar coming in, they will reduce the amount of times that this little droplet is passed on to sister bees, and you can understand then that a honey that has been passed on more than often or more than not have got more bees enzymes in, right? So that is a wonderful example to understand how all honeys are not equal. But one of the enzymes is called invertase, and invertase is responsible to break down the complex sugars into the more simple sugars. And would you believe that one of the adulterated methods that they are doing now is they are making invertase powder and they are mixing it into the honey. So if you test for the invertase enzyme, it shows up positive, that yes, it is in there, but it was man-made and it's added afterwards. So that just gives you an idea of the sophistication of adulteration we are facing. So, people ask me, but how do I know? Obviously the label should be able to give you quite a bit of information. Some people just go with the price. They pay the most expensive price and they assume that's the honey. It's difficult right now because I've seen a lot of scrupulous products, sort of taking advantage of consumers that way and just hike the price. Unscrupulous, thank you. Hike the price all the way up, and it's an inferior product. So these are the questions you need to ask your beekeeper or where you buy your honey from. First and foremost, do they know where the honey comes from? Our commercial products would say South Africa / Uruguay / Brazil, etc. That is blended honey. Now, when we use the word blended, please, it does not mean that it is not honey. It's important to understand that. A lot of these large products is honey. It's South African honey that's been blended with imported honey from Brazil or Uruguay or India. So we can't make that statement to say it's not honey. We can make the statement that it's not honey as the bees made it, because those honeys are flash heated to 60 degrees. And these bee enzymes, for one, is highly sensitive to temperatures, right? So high temperatures do negatively impact on the bee enzymes that's added by the bees. So not ideal. So when we use the word blended, it literally means you've taken one honey and blended with another honey. But in the world of adulteration, often people use blended, meaning it's been adulterated. So that's just a technical thing that's important to understand. So ask your beekeeper or the person, do you know where the honey comes from? Honey is seasonal. Honey granulates naturally. 99% of all honeys, to show you an example here, this is an unbelievable harvest that we got from a apiary in Devon, and you can see it's granulated. So if honey is higher in glucose than fructose, that will fast track the granulation. If a honey is higher in fructose, then often that delays the natural granulation. So all honeys with Lyon Raw is literally extracted and bottled. I don't even heat it at hive temperature because we study even how the honey granulates. We do organoleptic profiles and sensory analysis profiles. So we even describe the crystals. So we would describe the crystals in the mouthfeel. Is it homogeneous? Does it melt quickly? Is it soluble, highly soluble, medium soluble? Are the little crystals round, or is it sort of edgy crystals? We make notes about all of that. So for Lyon Raw honeys, I don't heat it at all. But when you see honey that's granulated, often people assume there's something wrong with it, because our whole lives we've been conditioned that honey is one color and it's see-through. The clearer the better. Let me tell you, that cannot be further from real honey. Okay, every single honey is different. If I have a hive, like my hives on my roof, and I harvest that honey the same week every year, the honey will be different. Because even the rain from the previous years, it changes. The soil, the botany, and sometimes the bees, all of a sudden there's something in flower. We see it in our gardens. Sometimes one year the bees love a certain flower. The next year it's flowering, but the bees are not going to it, and that's often because maybe the nectar production, you know, is it called the nectarines? The nectar, I can't think of the right word now. But the excretion of the nectar has been highly compromised because there wasn't enough rain in the previous season. Then the buzzing ladies will go and prefer something else. Sometimes we know now that they self-medicate. So sometimes if there's a virus or the baby bees need different, I don't know, nectar, they you know, these chicks have been around for over 100 million years. They know what they're doing. And so our job is just to embrace this gift and to not compromise it at all during the extraction or even when we're managing our hives. That is the challenge to us. The second thing that I also want to share with you, it really is impossible to upscale quality honey. Just isn't. Because of this. I mean, now imagine, the aloe harvest is so high in glucose, like I've got such little honey right now, and I only sell my honey through Lyon Raw Honey Club, because I literally curate, I collect rare and blue moon harvest from all over South Africa. I try and showcase our different biomes and the stories of these unbelievable beekeepers that are artists, really. You know, that's the work that I do. But I mean, the aloe we bottled 2 nights ago, it granulates within 48 hours. That's how much glucose, and it has a beautiful granulation. It is like silky, tiny, miniature little crystals. And the olfactory notes for that is the nose is very delicate. It's a little bit beeswax. It smells of dry hay. It's very, very subtle and gentle. And then when you put the honey in your mouth, then you get a little bit of a lactic vibe. I call it the condensed milk of nature without the sweetness. It's a medium sweet honey. And the higher percentage nectar aloe is in there, the lighter the honey is. So if we speak about monofloral honeys, or if you hear macadamia honey, sunflower honey, it is referred to, and every country is different. We don't have proper specifications yet, but it is inferred that around about 45% of the nectar value is from that single source. But please remember that there are still a range of other little nectars in there. So, you know, people will say, but how do you know it's citrus? How do you know it's macadamia? Because when you put the hives in a certain spot, you can see the bees prefer that nectar. So the majority of the nectar will be from that floral source. In the absence of that, like fynbos or even with urban areas, we would label that as a multiflora, you know, Benoni, or multiflora Kempton Park, or multiflora in the south, and that's how I label my honeys to know. And then at the back, I write the date the month that we harvested the honey and who the beekeepers are. So you want to know from your beekeepers where the honey's from, and especially how they've extracted it. Very important. It is acceptable to heat honey to hive temperature of around about 40 degrees. So that is acceptable in international levels and also in South Africa. It is deemed that at 40 degrees temperature, you are least affecting the innate heat-sensitive properties of honey. But you can imagine if honey granulates this quickly, how do you process it? How do you do high volumes of this? You have to heat it. And it's all about speed, right? So you have to pump that honey at great speed through the pumps to get it into the bottles. So 40 degrees won't do. You have to heat it up to 60 degrees. And heat, like I said, not only affects the heat-sensitive properties, but it also really compromises the aroma and the flavor. All the little volatile oils that the bees bring in from the botany that gives this amazing aroma and flavor is compromised. Commercial honeys are also then filtered through very fine mesh to such an extent that it even removes the pollen. And often the pollen is removed for 2 reasons. One, any little thing, tiny little thing in that honey acts as a nuclei, okay, for the formation of crystals. So sometimes if the pollen particles are there, that will kickstart the natural crystallization. And because consumers don't like crystallized honey. The retailers, I think there's a little gremlin. The retailers, it's all about consumer, right? It's all about the demand that we place on our retailers. So if we understand that honey is granulated, and we as consumers start asking, please, I'm happy with granulated honey, it's a mind shift. I mean, I've got most of my honey club members now love granulated honey. The only time it's a real pain is if you're in a hurry and you just want that squeezy bottle because it mixes through the yogurt easily, right? So granted, that even gets me going when I'm in a hurry. But besides that, it is just amazing to work. It's a lot less messier, and when you do cheese boards, etc., it is so easy to work with granulated honey. This is a wonderful example. So the concept of multiflora honey, the bees don't do multiflora honey. They put in every little hexagon cell, there will be only one nectar source. And the photo doesn't include the whole frame, but we had 5 different nectar hues of colour in this frame. Now you can imagine if you're going to decap this frame of comb and you spin it out, then it's multiflora, right? Because we have, through the extraction process, mixed the little nectars. Okay, so that's just something from a theoretical point of view. You can see this bee, she's a little bit older. Her thorax is nearly bald. That little black spot at the top will go completely bald. So when you observe the female honeybees in your gardens, then try and see if she's a new little bee and she's got covered in fluff, then she's a brand new little forager. And if she's gone completely bald, she's ending. She's reaching, the end of her life soon. This is the blue ribbon bush. Oh my gosh, they love it. So I did a garden talk 4 years ago, I forget where, but it was the most beautiful gardens in Bezuidenhout Valley, close to Bedfordville. Just the most beautiful. Anyway, so I arrived quite early, and I had the privilege to walk through these gardens, and these blue ribbon bush, let me tell you, it looked like, under the sea with sea anemones, and there's just thousands of fish. That's what it looked like. And not just honeybees. There were so many solitary bees, pollinators. I was like, oh my gosh, I have to plant this. So I did. Well, 4 years later, they don't like my blue ribbon. So either the one that I got has been, sort of doctored, because as gardeners, often we like the new varieties. In 2023, I was invited to the RHS Chelsea Flower Show in London. I was one of the bee and honey experts there for the week. And I was amazed. I just assumed that gardeners naturally is going to first and foremost garden for pollinators. Well, I had such a rude awakening because it really is all about the beauty of the flowers and these new varieties, and double leaves, and brighter, and there's now 7 different colors in something. That is all good, but we have to understand that it really can compromise the nectar production of these plants. So I always say to people, go to your local nursery. That's what I love about Hecker Garden Club. They really understand feeding bees for pollinators and bees and having foraging for them. But the best way of doing it, you go to your local garden center and they will tell you. You follow the bees and the pollinators. They're the customers. They will tell you what to buy. So and do this regularly in each season. That's how I established my bee and pollinator friendly garden. And then, okay, you don't have to do it here, but you then find the owners of these nurseries. You say, excuse me, sir or ma'am, this opinionated bee lady told us that you have to gather everything that the bees and pollinators are foraging on in this month. You have to gather those plants and put it in one corner, and you must put a sign up and say, bee sanctuary friendly plants. Please get them to do this, because we need to plant what they need to feed on. And it makes an unbelievable difference to your garden. It makes an unbelievable difference to your garden. If you have got the variety and the diversity of plants, everything filters through. Your microorganism in your soil, your fruit set, your flower set. It just is one happy little ecosystem. Right. Oh, I always jump ahead of my presentations. I've got like 12 presentations, so. Right. So it's important to understand that the bees are not dying out as a species. Do we need to protect them? Yes. Okay. And that's what this slide is all about. So this is an interesting, in fact, Kim told me from Tutusloka, I should change this, she says that in some regions it's only over 50%. You get little pockets where 70% of the 20 or 30, I say 22,000, some research says 30,000, I bring it down to 22,000 because there's so many different research. But anyway, the majority of them nest in the soil, at least over 50%. So you can see that how the urbanization, and even as gardeners, sometimes we're so eager to start gardening when spring has sprung, their little nests are still in the soil, those little babies are still in the nests. So it's important also not to turn the soil too quickly, because that's where they nest, in the soil. So the decline really is, lack of biodiversity, chemicals, they don't have habitat. How beautiful is she? So this is a cuckoo bee, one of the cuckoo bee species, new cuckoo bee. She's named cuckoo bee because much like the cuckoo bird, she pounces on another home, kicks them out. So I always say to people, take a photo of the slide if you want to, but this is really how you save bees. This is the key thing, how to save bees. Please only prune after flowering. We, as well as at home, we've got these beautiful little hedges. And I was mortified when I realized, oh my gosh, I keep that perfect and it never flowers. And often you find, like, your honeysuckle, a lot of these early spring flowers, or even that flowers throughout the year, they give very important foraging in a dearth period. Sometimes we look around us and everything is green and you think there's so much food for the pollinators, but there really isn't. So please, and start with herbs. Often people say to me, but I'm not really into gardening. I'm like, start with herbs. Herbs are easy, but allow them to flower, because the flowering stage of herbs, the herbs really, a variety of herbs attract a lot of pollinators. Yes, you see how I jump ahead of my presentation. Right, so I'm going to talk just a little bit about honey. But the way I'm going to do this time is I'm going to invite questions, because my son is visiting us currently. So my mommy heart, I'm going to dash out of here to be with my son. So I'm not available like last time for chatting afterwards. But any questions on honey?
Yeah, the clearer the honey, is it the least honey? Is it mixed with something else?
No, unfortunately there's
like
no.
A cheaper honey. I fight with my husband.
Yes.
I always say he goes for the cheap.
Yes. Look, those honeys that are very clear, even the pollen have been filtered out. And you can assume that it's been flash heated. So some of the plantations, honey production plantations, will flash heat it for a very short time. That's ideal. You just want to flash heat it. It depends on the equipment that they have. Sometimes it's heated at a low temperature, but if you do that over a long period of time, you still compromise the quality of the honey. So we can't assume that that's not honey. But what we can assume is that it's been heated and over-filtered. Okay. There is no way of knowing if honey is real or not without laboratory tests, unfortunately. And that is, why with my honeys, I don't even buy honey. I work with beekeepers at least 2 years. I want to know everything before I will even touch the honey. And I'll try and be present at extractions whenever I can. Yes?
Sorry, if all the bottles are labeled irradiated honey, what does that mean?
Right. Thank you. So the best way, you get different types of irradiation. Ideally, the best form of radiation is the gamma irradiation process. It is believed to least damage the properties in honey. Now, why do we irradiate honey? So South African honey from our country, in our country, should not be irradiated. So as soon as we see irradiation on the label, it means that it is honey from outside of South Africa. And by law, all honey coming into South Africa has to be irradiated to protect our bees, to protect our bees from diseases. There's a whole variety of diseases. One such disease is AFB, American foul brood disease. You also have European foul brood disease, and AFB is highly, highly contagious. These honeys, when we tour and we buy little jars of honey, they should legally actually be irradiated before we bring them into South Africa, because if there's a disease, even if you wash that bottle with warm water, AFB, warm water, boiling water does not kill AFB spores. And you throw that jar away, and if our little bees, we had a breakout of AFB in the 1980s, massive breakout of it in the Western Cape, and those apiaries had to be isolated and burned to the ground. But I see Mike Alsop from ARC in Stellenbosch have put a notice out. There is little pockets of foul brood disease. So it's very important as beekeepers to know these diseases, go for a beekeeping course. Diseases should be covered in every single beekeeping course. So be astute as to who you sign up with. Next question.
I had the same question.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yes. Half-felt honey, yes.
Honey and just I've been very happy with it, but
Yes.
what is it? Do you know anything about?
I have no idea. I know they do high volume, and I know they buy a lot of honey from South Africa beekeepers, but I haven't been to their plant. I would assume that it is, high volume. They have to heat it, but I do know they've put a lot of investment into, but I haven't been. I'd love to go and have a little tour. So unfortunately, I can't comment. I get these questions a lot, but from a professional point of view, I cannot give thumbs up. I can't authenticate any honey in the absence of a laboratory report. We're not allowed to. But I do part with questions. I don't do name and shame. I know who they are. But I don't think that's professional. I'd rather tell you what real honey should be and the questions you should ask. And trust your gut. Often at markets you find amazing honeys, but let me tell you, it is back-breaking work. And often with our bees, you can only really work with our bees in the evenings because they're so feisty. Some of these beekeepers will drive 3 hours to a site. You know what petrol and toll gates cost? That's just to check on your bees. Sometimes you arrive, then it's been burned down, vandalized, the list goes on, stolen, kom daan, jou huis is weg hoor. Let me tell you, honestly, I'm not exaggerating, the challenges our beekeepers are dealing with is unbelievable. So you cannot sell a jar of honey, cannot, under 150 Rand as a small scale. You just can't, it doesn't make financial sense to you. So I always appeal to people, and I think I used the example last time. We go off to Dis-Chem and, you shop all these things and you believe all the labels that's on all the products, 3 grand, ka-ching, you don't bat an eyelid, it's expensive, that's what things cost. But a beekeeper puts up their price by 10 Rand and people turn away. So you will find honeys at 70, 60, 80 Rand at markets, and often these are beekeepers, hobbyist beekeepers, that started with a hive. It never ends at one hive. Before you know it, you've got 10 hives, your brother's place, your mother-in-law's place, and at the stand, like you put a hive there. And then one year you've got a bumper harvest, and now you've handed out bottles to everyone every friend, every family, but you're still left with quite a bit, and off you go to the local market. And often, you do it for fun, but that's not your main income. You're not dependent on that income. You're doing it as a hobby. So you price it at 80 Rand. It's like talking to people. It's such a special thing, sharing your honey with someone. It really is. But that creates an expectation that that's what you can buy honey for. And I'll say to people, if you can get that honey, buy. But it is not what honey costs. I'm telling you. It's impossible. We are losing our artisanal small-scale beekeepers, not just in South Africa, but throughout the world. And soon, we will only be left with large-scale pollination honeys that's been heated and is crystal clear.
What do you know